Hi everybody, it's Peter Zalums, GriniFlix Adventurate. Welcome to another video. Today I've got an exciting video. I've got Mike O'Rourke from Chicago. Mike and I have recently had the opportunity to meet, but even better, to work together and get to know each other in Australia when we did a gig together for a week throughout Queensland, also New South Wales. What I hope to do with this video series, where I have an opportunity to meet and to interview photographers in all aspects of their photography life, whether it be personal or business, is just to understand a bit about your story, Mike.
Yep.
How did you get started? When was the first time you picked up a camera, and yeah, and maybe just talk about that story. The other interesting thing about Mike is he is a loyal subscriber and viewer of my channel.
Sure.
And
Yep.
maybe, Mike, you can just give me a quick intro of yourself
Yeah.
and tell me how you found me, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've been a corporate video producer and kind of commercial video producer in the Chicago area since 1999. And part of one of my kind of side hobbies, in addition to working with clients on producing videos day to day, has been dabbling in photography ever since I was in college. And I had first stumbled across your channel because I did a Google search on how to adjust I think it was the vertical adjustment in a Leica rangefinder camera, because I had one that I had inherited from my grandfather. And it focused fine and the photos were great, but there was always just this annoying, uh, the rangefinder patch was always just a little bit off. So I did a Google search on that, and I think I came across your video on how to use an Allen key and go in and adjust that to get that uh, vertical vertical register just perfect. So that was the first video that I saw, and then subscribed at that point, and then have just, like most people nowadays, have started watching your content every time it's released. Yeah, well, it was very helpful. It was very helpful, and I've used it, I think, on all the rangefinders I have now, and they're all, at the moment, they're all perfectly calibrated, so it worked out really well.
What I hope to do with this video series, where I have an opportunity to meet and to interview photographers in all aspects of their photography life, whether it be personal or business, is just to understand a bit about your story, Mike.
Yep.
How did you get started? When was the first time you picked up a camera? And yeah, and maybe just talk about that story.
Yeah, well, the very first memory I have, well, a couple memories. So one was, I always recall back and I was born in 1977. So for me, my childhood was basically the 80s up through the mid to late 90s. And I remember one of the things that was kind of unique back then was like the family camera, the family 35 millimeter film SLR was kind of a big deal. And it was like it was an expensive item in the family. And I always remember that my dad would bring out he had a Olympus. I think it was an OM1. And I always remember that it would come out at Christmas time and on birthdays and special occasions. And I would see it and it would look cool. And I would wonder how it worked. And it had all those cool knobs and dials and buttons on it. And he would use it for the day, and then it would get packed away again and put up on a high shelf in the closet until the next big family holiday. Not like today where cameras and cell phones are ubiquitous. Everybody has a camera on their hip at all times. Um, and I think the first camera that I ever got was from an uncle of mine, and it was I forget who made it. It might have been Yashica or Sears or one of those, but it was a very simple point and shoot camera, and it had a big blue button on top. and it was super cool looking. And I remember he gave me that, and I was pretty young. I was probably a little bit too young to actually, appreciate having a camera, but he probably got it in some, giveaway or something like that. And he gave it to me, and then I used that for a little while and kind of lost interest. And then I didn't really start getting into photography as a hobby until I got into college, because as part of studying film and video production and journalism at the time was everybody had to take a darkroom photography class. So from probably 1997 to 1999, I was shooting with a Pentax K1000, which I would go out and shoot photo assignments with, and then we would take it into the dark room and develop the film, and then make our own prints too with Ilford photo paper, which was a process I always enjoyed. I thought it was really cool and very interesting, and I didn't really get, I haven't done too much of that since then. I've done some digital printing, but I always enjoyed that process too. So that was kind of the beginning, was the big blue button camera and the Pentax K1000. And then my photography has been kind of a sidecar hobby in addition to video production, all these 20 years later.
Thank you for sending me some of those photos.
It's strange for me too, because it's, if you have like a job in, accounting or education or medicine, like your job usually doesn't cross over too much with a hobby like photography. But with myself and with a lot of other folks in this business as well, there's always kind of this intertwining of like the video side of things and the photo side of things. And of course, nowadays it's all very interrelated. But for many years it wasn't. It was kind of two different disciplines.
Yeah, but in those early days, I guess you would have been mainly focusing on just the photography side. Would that be right?
Well, no, I went to college for video production, so they had the photo program was something that you took in addition to the rest of the journalism classes and the other classes like TV production and things like that. So for me, it was actually a pretty small part of the major overall, but I think that they wanted people to get at least a very basic understanding of framing and exposure and the exposure triangle in things like that. And I will say that it definitely, taking that class with the Pentax K1000 and developing my own film and printing did definitely help me visually with the video production side of things for sure.
Let's have a look at some of the photos and then we can talk about them as well.
Sure. I was at college working with the K1000 and the film prints and things like that. And then after I got out and started working professionally, and I was still shooting here and there with various cameras, uh, I had received from a grandfather that passed away an Olympus OM4, which was an awesome SLR camera, and I used that in the early 2000s. And then once digital photography started getting popular, there was kind of a weird um, there was kind of a weird dearth where there wasn't too much to shoot on. Like coming from a really nice SLR camera, the first digital cameras were kind of chunky and brick-like and not very inspirational, and the photos were not that good. So I had kind of a brief run of small digital cameras, I think from Canon and things like that. But eventually I kind of went through, and once my wife and I started having kids, I had a Nikon D40 and then a D300 and then a D800 and a D810. And eventually at some point I started going back a little bit more toward film. And by the time I started getting back into film cameras just to kind of have fun, all of these cameras were available on eBay. And one of the things that I got kind of excited about, and this was also early in my exposure to the Leica camera bodies, was these Nikon finders. So these mid to late 90s Nikon rangefinder cameras, the 35 Ti and the 28 Ti, are really cool cameras, and they were fun because I was able to load them up with a film stock. They had these really kind of neat analog gauges on them. And I would take them with on shoots that we had. I had one shoot in particular, a weekend in Las Vegas at the big NAB convention out there that they have every year, where I was walking around with that Nikon 35 tie. And it was just a great camera to have on all the time because it was so small. So you had a little bit of like the Leica convenience of a small, unobtrusive camera, but then also being able to shoot film in the modern age and have a little fill flash and that kind of stuff. So that those both of those cameras are really cool. I still have both of those. I haven't shot them in a couple years now, but I really do need to get out and work with them a little bit more. I've used the 35 more than the 28. But I should take them both out and use them again because they are really fun. I should have brought one with on the trip to Australia while we were working together. That would have been cool, especially if I had known that you'd never worked with one of those. I would have brought both of them out so you could play with them.
Yeah. Oh, well, next time.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next shot. Your Leica, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So that is the Leica M3 double stroke that I inherited from my late grandfather on my mom's side. So that camera I got in probably I think it was probably 2015 or 2016. My parents gave that to me. I think it's like on permanent family loan, I think is kind of how the arrangement is, but um that was my first Leica body that I had. And once I had that Leica body, then that kind of became my gateway drug to experimenting with some of the earlier digital bodies, like the Leica T, which was a crop sensor digital body, which I still think is really cool. There's another one they have, the TL, and I think they have a TL2, and I have a Leica T and a TL2, and those are really great cameras. But the Leica M3 was my first rangefinder camera, and about that time, and the reason I have that, I took that picture of the M3, and then I have those prints behind it, is because once I started shooting with a rangefinder camera, that's what also kind of really got me into printing. Um, and there was just something that I liked about seeing through a rangefinder. Um, and composing shots through a rangefinder almost helped me pre-visualize what a print could look more like. A lot of times my photography is very much for me, and I'll take pictures of little moments that I want to remember in 15, 20 years of the kids as they're small. So that was kind of a good collage that I created there just for myself to be able to put on a wall and
Yeah.
have that to look at.
All right. And then we've got the next one.
A shoot in Miami, and I was bringing along some still cameras, and I wanted to be able to have kind of a small package that gave me a lot of focal length options with just kind of a small lightweight kit. And so with what I had at the time, I've got the Leica, that's an M240p body, and I've got a 35 millimeter Summicron on it. And then I had the Fuji X Pro 3, and that has a 50 Summicron on it. And then I believe that one in the center there is a 90 millimeter, probably a Tele Elmarit. It's the 90 millimeter f2.8. And so my thought was, and the reason I probably took a snapshot of that for myself, and I can tell it's probably just a cell phone photo, was my idea was I could use the full frame MP240 to go as wide as 35 millimeter. And then with the Fuji X Pro 3, I could always, if I wanted to get in really with a lot of reach, I could always put the 90 millimeter Leica lens on the X Pro 3. So I could basically go from 35 out to what, 135 with just having the two rangefinder bodies and three small lenses. I do find myself really gravitating nowadays toward a rangefinder size and shape camera as opposed to a DSLR
Yeah.
shape. So that's kind of too where I've really gotten used to using the Leica bodies and the X Pro 3 bodies for things that I shoot personally. If I ever have to cross over and a client wants some pictures. If we're shooting something with some C-suite executives and they ask for a couple quick, portraits while we're there, I'll make sure that I have, like a Fuji X-T4 with me or my Nikon D810. But if it's for personal work, I'm always choosing rangefinder bodies instead of the more DSLR shaped bodies.
And in, 30, in 35 millimeter speak, what's your favorite focal length?
I kind of think it's 35. I I've done the thing where you look through and you filter your results by focal length, and I really do feel like it kind of settles on 35. Um, the only thing that I sometimes don't like about shooting 35 is I do like a 50, a 75, and a 90 for being able to crop things out and be very selective in what you want to shoot. I really like that 75 millimeter on a Leica full frame body. I think it looks great. And it gives you that control over the frame to make sure that you're able to crop things out when you're out on streets or in buildings and things like that. So, yeah, I think probably for me, it's like 35 millimeter and 75 millimeter probably are where I like to shoot a lot.
Yeah, I must admit, 35 has been my favorite focal length in the years past. But these days, I'm doing quite a bit of studio work and fashion
Yeah.
and portrait work. And so 50 millimeter is now my favorite length.
Yeah, sometimes I feel kind of guilty too because it's like, 50 millimeter or 50 millimeter equivalent has been around forever and like 40 millimeter too. And it's like, well, I feel like if I'm a modern photographer, I should be shooting with these, the exotic wide angles or the exotic super telephotos. But there's still so many instances where just being at 35, 40, or 50 millimeter really is the right focal length for the job, and even like the shoot that you and I had uh, in Australia, it's like so much of what we do, you can get really hung up in the techniques and the coolness of certain shots or certain angles or certain focal lengths. But at the end of the day, what we're always doing and what I find myself doing, even on my personal side, is shooting in sequences rather than shots. And so for that instance, if you're doing that and you have one lens, you kind of wind up stepping back a few feet to get a wide shot of the scene, and then stepping in a couple inches, couple feet to get, a shot of two people talking and then the other two people talking, and then you go in a little closer for a single close up or a detail shot. So, when you're in that situation and you're in the middle of the action, that kind of range from 35 to 50 really is ideal for what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I've got another camera here of yours, which I thought was quite unusual.
Oh, somewhere between 2009, 2010, 2011, and Panasonic come out with this stereoscopic video camera. And this was kind of in the middle of like the DV revolution. So all these new 24p video cameras came out, and it was after a lot of the video cameras switched over to 16 by 9 sensors. And Panasonic thought that during this whole time period that 3D video might really catch on. And so they made this 3D camera. You would put two SD cards in it, one for the left lens and one for the right lens. And when you were recording video, it would record those two separate imagers on those cards. And then in editing, you would put it through Panasonic's software to then create the 3D videos. And you would have to wear like actual, 3D glasses
Yeah.
to be able to see the effect. But it was very interesting. Like it was only one focal length, so you couldn't zoom it. So there was no zooming function. So I think it was fixed at like an equivalent 45 millimeter or 50 millimeter. Um, and I remember talking to the guy at the time. I'm like, well, what do how do I edit this footage? It's like, how are my editors and I are going to work with this? And he said, well, Adobe Premiere is going to have some plugins for it. And I think they still might. I think they still have some plugins to work on 3D footage. But I did some recordings in the backyards with the kids, and an editor friend of mine, he and I shot some test footage with it. And they also shipped a big monitor to me. So to be able to watch the footage in the
Wow.
field, if you wanted to see it, if you wanted to see the 3D effect while you were shooting, you also had to have a monitor with it. So I would hook up the monitor, and then you could actually see the 3D effect while you were shooting. It was really cool, but it was, you know, it was kind of a novelty. People have tried to make 3D cameras work a few different times throughout motion picture history, and it never has quite caught on. And that one did not really catch on either. But it was fun, and
Do you recall how much it must have cost an arm and a leg?
Um, I don't, it was probably double the price of whatever that equivalent camera was that they based that off of. If that was a $7,000 camera system, it was probably a $15,000 camera body or a $12,000 camera body. And then you would most likely have to buy a monitor with it. So that was probably another $3,000 or $4,000. But if you were really into shooting at the time, if you were really into shooting 3D stereoscopic projects, that would actually be a pretty cheap way to do it. Because any other way to shoot stereoscopic stuff like that, you would have to have super expensive camera rigs, and all the technology to put it together. And their theory was they were able to put it all together in a reasonably priced package
Yeah,
for folks.
compact.
But it never really caught on. It never caught on. It was talked about for maybe 6 months or a year, and it didn't work out for them.
I've just selected a bunch of photos here and we just go through those.
So that camera was a Leica M6 TTL, and that is T-Max 400
Ah,
film. So that is a film shot, yeah. And I don't have a record of the focal length, but I would assume that's probably a 35, I would think. 35 or 28 probably.
when you're sort of visualizing things or imagining things, do you imagine in black and white? Do you imagine in color?
I go through phases where I will go through phases where I'm really into black and white, and I'm really trying to like um exercise the black and white muscle and think in black and white and think in, light only and pools of light and things like that. And then sometimes I just kind of throw that out the window for a while, and I just shoot willy-nilly, and then shoot stuff in color and then make it black and white in post. I have, for the longest time, I've wanted to get a Leica monochrome body, just to play with that. And I've been waiting for the used prices to come down. I actually I have a recurring a calendar reminder for myself every 6 months, and it says like time to buy a Leica monochrome body yet, and I'm just waiting for the prices to come down. And part of it is the economy too, and it's like, you
Yeah.
know, post-COVID world, things are definitely different than they were beforehand. But I would like to play with a monochrome digital body because I do like shooting in black and white, and I think the biggest thing that I like about it is I like the removal of the distraction of color. Um, you know, I'm sure you've had the experience where there's a photo that you take and you really it doesn't work in your mind the way you're looking at it, and you can't maybe you can't place your finger on it, or you look at it and it's like, wow, this photo would be great if it weren't for this, giant orange fender in the lower right hand corner, this weird orange car, and then you turn it black and white, and then now you don't have that distracting color anymore.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gets back to my whole idea too of like, you know, gravitating more toward like 75 millimeter and 90 millimeter and trying to crop out what I don't want to see
Yeah.
is, shooting black and white as a way to kind of get rid of colors and things, design elements that you want to try to avoid in a photo.
Yeah. All right. Well, that leads on to the next topic, which is color.
I just happened to walk out behind our office one evening and the sun was setting behind me, and I liked the way the shadows played on that wall of that office building. And I've tried to recreate that photo since, and I can't. And I think it might be because of the particular time of year that I took the photo and the way that the shadows are cast. I think it was probably early fall, and I just haven't been able. I've gone out there multiple times since then, and I haven't been able to capture it the exact same way. Partly because I was upset that I had to crop in on it a little bit, so I wanted to
Mm.
get a perfect shot without having to crop in on it. A number of years ago, I did a photo workshop with a photographer from Singapore. His name is Ming Tien, and he had a really great blog years ago, which is still online and it's all archived now, but he doesn't maintain the blog anymore. But he was putting on some workshops around the world, and he came to Chicago, and I worked with him for 2 or 3 days and a number of other students. And one of the things that I learned on that workshop was that for a lot of photos, especially street photography, um, the folks who are really good at it, they find a spot and they pick a spot and they stay there, and they're like a hunter. They just wait, whether it's early morning or whether it's they're looking for midday sun or evening sun, like they will stalk that location sometimes for days at a time until they get the right lighting, the right weather, the right time of year, and then they find that perfect looking person and the great, the perfect wardrobe or the red umbrella just going right across the crosswalk
Mm.
at just the right time. And so, you know, it was great to take a workshop like that where you had like a couple days to really do things like that and just learn, and just immerse yourself in only worrying about taking photos. But you're right, it's like, day to day, there's so many instances where I'm walking to a meeting or from a meeting or picking the kids up from school, and it's like, wow, that would be a great shot. And sometimes I'll take out the cell phone and, snap a photo of it, but it's never as satisfying as if I was able to use a real camera with a real lens and get it just the way I want. So this is just something that caught my eye on one of my many photo walks. So that was with a Fuji X-T4. Sometimes little things like that will catch my eye. I like the lines of the railings. Um, I find myself always trying to make photos that are a little bit um, geometric. And I had a professor in college who turned me on to that artist, Pete Mondrian, the guy who would make it's like giant, white rectangles with black dividing lines and then like one red square or one yellow square up in a corner.
Yep.
Neoplasticism was the design principle. And so I really got kind of turned on to that in college. So I find myself gravitating sometimes towards shots that have that kind of neoplastic look. And that I think that's, probably why I took that one.
Are they rolling
Oh,
cigars?
This is, yeah, so this is, I took this shot with a Leica M10, and this was down in Ybor City. This was in the Ybor City area of Tampa, Florida. So Ybor City is one of the like the oldest cities in Florida, and it might be one of the oldest established cities in the United States. And they are very well known for cigar making down there because they have a big Cuban population and they make Cuban style cigars in Ybor City. It was pretty dark. It was pretty dim. Shutter speed was 1/125th. Um, but it still didn't completely freeze the action on the guys. You can see as they're talking and laughing, they're, a little bit soft. But yeah, this one I know I went back and forth on color and black and white and decided black and white was best for it. And I thought it was just cool that these guys, it was like 7:30 or 8 p.m. All the other shops on the street were closed, and then these guys were just hanging out. And I actually took this through a window, so they're
Mm.
behind a window pane here. And I just saw them, and I grabbed the shot real quick. It was one of those where, with the Leica, it's like, you always have your lens tab set for infinity, and it was one of those where I saw it happening and just raised the camera up to my eye and quickly pulled the tab in until the rangefinder patch was pretty well aligned, and then snapped the shot while it was happening. So yeah, it was a good one. I mean, I always feel like black and white works so well for so many things. And
Mm.
we we had we used to work at a studio here in Chicago for a photojournalist. His name was Del Hall. And he got his start in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And all of his stuff, everything's black and white just by nature of the fact that that's all they had then. And when you look through like a retrospective of his photojournalism, it's all amazing shots and everything looks great. And as you're flipping through a book of his photos, you kind of forget like you don't really even notice anymore black and white or color. They're just great images of humanity or interesting events or spectacles. Yeah, this was so that's Pentax K1000. That would have been before Kathy and I were married, so probably 2001 or 2002. It was a New Year's party up in Madison, Wisconsin. We were getting ready to go out that night, so I had the Pentax K1000 with me. So
It just shows how important it is to take the photographs at every stage of your life.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it's interesting. That's very true. And I remember when my son Jack was born. He was born in 2006. The first kind of real digital camera I got was the Nikon D40. When I'm looking at these photos 30 years from now, am I gonna like the Canon look better or the Nikon look better? And I remember at the time, my after looking at all sorts of different things, I decided I would rather have the Nikon look because I wanted things to have a more of a documentary look, and I felt that sometimes the Canon look um, had more of kind of like a advertising feel or something that was more like artistically manufactured. And I wanted to feel like when I was looking into these photos, they were perfect documents of when I was there. So at that time, I made the election to go with the Nikon system. And now that Jack, my oldest, is 18, I am glad that I made that decision because when I look back at a lot of these family photos that I'd processed at the time, I really do feel like I'm back in those moments. And maybe it would have been the same too with the Canon color science, but for me at least, it worked out really well. So this photo was with the Nikon 28 tie, so that Nikon rangefinder, the 28 millimeter, and that is Ektar 100 film stock, which I probably toned down a little bit for the colors. I actually really like that film stock, and when I do shoot film, I really only shoot film now in the summer months, and I really like that Kodak Ektar 100 film stock. I've never had a photo that I've been disappointed with um, when I'm using that photo stock. And I think it was originally put together to kind of mimic Kodachrome or some of the older, more punchier color stocks from decades ago. And it does have some of that look, but I was always concerned that maybe for skin tones it wouldn't look as nice as something like Portra 400. But I've found that it really does look good. And then this was just on a family vacation. Yeah, so that photo was on a Nikon D810 body. And that was shot at 24, that says here in the data, it was shot at 24 millimeter. So
Mhm.
um, probably probably my my wide street sweeper lens that I have for that camera. So I just saw that and thought it looked good and shot the heck out of it. Um, I will say that the great thing about the Nikon system, and I think probably Canon too, of the Japanese full frame sensors and what you can do with their the raw files really is awesome. I'm sure that photo didn't look as nice, coming right out of the camera. That was some massaging in Lightroom.
So, and then we go on to the last category, which is your work environment.
Yeah, so that's me behind the camera there. And that's Pat Yackley, my longtime good buddy, and he's our video editor. So now the project that we shot with you in Australia, he's been the one who's editing that piece all together. And this was a video that we shot in Ireland. Pat and I both went to Loras College, which is out in Dubuque, Iowa, and they had a foreign exchange program with the Dublin Institute of Technology in Ireland. And we did kind of a mini documentary shoot for, I think it was like 6 days. It would have been, this would have been probably the year 2000. So I was already out of college for a year, and Pat and I went over there, and we were all over Dublin and Howth and the Wicklow Mountains and Galway, following this group of college exchange students all over the countryside. And I think there I was shooting it was a Canon XL1 or XL1S, which was an early DV based camera. So it took DV tapes, mini DV tapes. And it was a really good camera. It had a really nice Canon lens on it. It was pretty high tech at the time for like prosumer or just below broadcast level camera. And I really enjoyed working with that camera. And I should say that what I do is I'm mainly a video producer, and I always have been a video producer. So I'm kind of working with the main content shooters and the editors and the sound folks and all that kind of stuff, and facilitating projects. But every once in a while, I will still shoot a project myself. And especially in those earlier years when you're kind of sussing out what part of the industry you want to be in, I would still do shoots more frequently. And so that was definitely at that stage of my life.
With DV tape, what have you done with your DV tape? You've kept it in DV tape. You've
I
did,
have I have a closet here at the office that has kind of the deep archive of older formats. So I do have a lot of mini DV tapes. I have a lot of Betacam SP tapes. We have some digital Betacam tapes. Some of the mini DV stuff that I knew I would want to access frequently or was really important, I transferred to DVDs or hard drives years ago. But I do still have a lot of stuff that, if I wanted to, I would have to get a DV deck and fire it up and interface it with Adobe Premiere and import the footage, which, as far as I know, Adobe Premiere does still have I think it's called the RS-422, RS-442 interface controls. So as long as you can get the old computer cable from the DV deck into the computer with an adapter, you can still control an old tape deck with a modern version of Premiere, as far as I know, at least up until a couple years ago. So yeah, if you wanted to, you could plug the deck in and pop the tape in and play things back. And then it's just a matter of, has the tape dried out? Is it brittle? Will it snap when you try to play it back? Um, but I've had pretty good luck over the years with even with VHS tapes. Folks will have some things that they want to move from VHS over to hard drive or DVD, and I haven't had a tape break in quite a long time. So it does hold up pretty well, although we are kind of entering the age now where if you want to move stuff off of tape, you really should be moving it off sooner than later.
That's true. All right. So this might be a typical work environment for you.
Yeah, so this was typical work environment. I took this photo because we have been experimenting the last couple years with trying to take some of the smaller, I call them hybrid cameras. I think other people call them hybrid cameras or HD SLRs or you take a camera like here I've got this is one of our camera operators, Charlie Grant. He's working, I think he's got a Sony FX6 there is what he's holding. But then I was running a secondary camera as a wide shot camera for a scene, which is a Fuji X-T4, which I have outfitted with a shotgun microphone and an extended, wood handle and a battery grip and a little monitor, and then also a wireless microphone transmitter and receiver. So I have experimented with kind of using some of um, the more prosumer cameras or the hybrid cameras in the work that we do. If you're intentional about it and you're careful with how you use them and you use them to their strengths in that environment, they work just fine. Usually, though, we always start with trying to use broadcast cameras first, just because that's what the clients expect and that's what they're paying for. Um, and they have, professional XLR audio inputs, and we can jam the time code between cameras quicker and things like that. But yeah, more and more we have been using, some of the smaller cameras, and it's been pretty successful so far. There's only a few instances where it's kind of hosed us. This is probably back in 2000 and this is probably 2006 or 2007. This is a producer friend of mine, Troy Okunyeski. He's standing in the middle there, and then Ed, Ed is our another buddy of ours. He's over off to the left there, and we were shooting a piece for the United States Marine Corps. So this was a motorcycle safety film for the U.S. Marines. What was it? It was Camp Lejeune, and we needed a place to have a motorcycle and a bunch of lights set up and a smoke machine. And we were talking to either I think it was the lieutenant colonel that we were working with on the base. We were describing what we needed, and they didn't have any studio space, but he's like, well, we've got a landing zone out there. You guys could take over this landing zone and you could shoot there after dark. And I think we wound up shooting this on a tactical landing zone from like 10:30 p.m. to around 2 or 3 a.m. And we just had we had some generators out there and a bunch of lights, and they had a big industrial smoke machine because I guess the Marines, when they're doing certain training operations, they need to put a bunch of smoke into the air to make the Marines, see what it's like in a real combat environment. So
Yeah.
they had pretty much everything we needed to build this little environment with this guy and his motorcycle. And I remember one strange thing about that shoot was in the middle of the shoot, we heard all this noise coming down and we looked up and there was these giant circles of lightning in the air over the top of us. And I guess somebody in one of the traffic control towers had failed to tell some pilots of the V2 Ospreys, those are the big twin rotor, it's kind of like half airplane, half helicopter.
Yeah.
They had forgot to tell them that we were going to be shooting on this big tactical landing zone out in the middle of the woods. And so they came into land and they were right over the top of us, and then they had to wave off and go somewhere else to land. But that was pretty exciting
Wow.
for a few minutes for sure.
Yeah, you forget, when people see the end production, no one actually understands the rigors and the challenges you go through,
Right.
the
Yeah.
discomfort, the uncertainty, and everything else that goes on in actually creating the film and the situation.
Yeah, and it's like I remember on this shoot, like, we had already shot on the base all day and it was hot. I mean, it's down, Camp Lejeune is in the southeast. It's hot and humid, and we'd already put in probably a 10 or 12 hour day and probably took a little break to change and have dinner. And then it's like, okay, now we gotta go shoot from, 10 p.m. to 2 or 3 a.m. out on this landing zone. And you're right. It's like all the hours that you put in. And then I know for a fact that this sequence in the closing part of the video is probably less than 30 seconds long. So it's like all that work to just put together this little snippet of cinema.
Incredible.
And then this is a behind the scenes hospital shoot featuring a local hospital in Chicago. So this is something, a very common type of project for us. So this is the type of thing where we've got a couple cameras set up. One is static, one is a moving camera on a slider or a dolly, and then all the lighting that we do to make people look their best. Same thing like you do day in and day out, especially in the studio, is
Mm.
big soft key lights. Sometimes, like in this situation, we're doubling up the softness. For this one here, I know we've got a 4x4 silk, and then we've got another probably a 24 by 36-inch Chimera behind it. Um, and then we've also got a Chimera on the backlight on the doctor, and then a net to try and take some of that light off of his white coat so it doesn't make it too overexposed. So yeah, just kind of everyday shoot for us and the kinds of things that we do. Yeah, that's Randy there. So he is shooting. I thought that was kind of a funny photo. That I'm pretty sure is a Leica shot with a 35 on it. I think Leica M10 body. That is shot at f2, 125th of a second. So that was inside a hearing aid testing booth. So we were doing a project for a hearing aid company, and that woman was in there and she's got tubes in her ears that are sending in a signal, different tones and things like that. And then she's got a joystick where she hits the button when she hears the different tones. And Randy was in there getting shots of her as the operator is behind a wall looking in on her while they're doing that. And I just thought that was kind of a funny shot while we were in there. So that is one of the rare instances where I was producing and directing with Randy on the day, and I was also had a camera around my neck, so I was able to grab a pretty fun shot.
Yeah, it's a great shot, that one. I selected this one because, again, it's not always open spaces, just like the one with Randy there. You're in
Yeah.
a more compact area. Now you're back in the car.
Yep, yep. Yeah, so this was a piece. So that's John Dewey, one of my other favorite cameramen in the world here in town. So this was a project, and we were shooting an interview with this was a patient testimonial piece. So very similar to what we were doing on your shoot is like sometimes you want to interview folks in their car while they're driving. It just offers a different vantage point. It offers a different angle. Cars are usually really quiet inside, so you usually pick up nice sound. Even though you get a little road noise, it's still a pretty quiet environment. But then again, you need, depending on the shot and the size of the vehicle, you need a super wide lens too. So I know John has a super wide lens mounted on his, I think that's a Sony FX6 camera body. And then he's also giving a little bit of fill light to the subject too, because as you know, once you're in a vehicle like that, the entire world around you is super bright and is a lit exterior, and then you're inside this car, which is kind of a dark environment. And it's very rare that you have enough ambient light bouncing in that you get a good exposure on the subject. So oftentimes we'll try and bring in a small light just to give them a little bit of pop. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to equalize the sunshine outside, or it doesn't have to overpower the sunshine outside, but at least if you can bring them up a little bit so it looks a little better and doesn't look like they're inside a cave. But yeah, and then John's just squished up. He's squished up in the passenger seat,
Yeah.
making the best shot that he can while we're driving along. And the more modern, like, the stabilized lenses nowadays certainly help with that. We've done similar shots like that also with gimbal cameras. Um, uh, but sometimes depending on the shoot, we sometimes we're moving so fast on a given shoot day, like we don't always necessarily have time to put the main camera down and pick up a gimbal camera and jockey back and forth between them. So sometimes it's best, we'll just run with one camera body for the full day. Or, if the camera operator knows that it's going to take him 45 seconds to 2 minutes to switch from the main camera over to the gimbal camera, he'll just elect to just shoot it on the main camera. And sometimes you don't have the time, like you saw in our shoots, like there are just, there are time elements you're running up against, having to leave a location because somebody needs to go somewhere, or they only contracted to have a space available until a certain time. And it's like you just have to do what you got to do to get the shot. Yeah, and a lot of what we do too, especially the last fif 10, 15 years, a lot of what we do is more documentary based. If the guy who's driving the car is an actor and we've hired him for the day, then we know, and he knows, and his agent knows that we're going to shoot as long as it takes to get the shot and get exactly the way that we want it, and that works out fine. But if it's an everyday person and you're doing like a patient testimonial or a product endorsement or something like that, they're usually not being paid for their time. They're not being compensated for their time. Um, you don't want to press your luck in keeping them tied up too long. Sometimes they start to wear out too. Most people, if you work with them for 3 or 4 hours, by 5 hours, like they're ready to pack it in for the day. Like they're tired. They don't want to have a camera in their face anymore. They can't think straight. We've asked them 50,000 questions and they want to be done. So yeah, a lot of times it's like you have to get it done as quick as you can and be done.
Then leads me to the final shot.
Yeah, this was a crew wrap shot for a piece that we worked on for Navistar trucks. So this was an engine video, and this was with a good buddy of mine, Mark Voss. And so this is just the crew after a job well done. This was another overnight shoot. So this was another one where we had access to a diesel engine repair shop, and we were able to get the Navistar branded trucks in there. And we only had the overnight because it was a operating, diesel repair facility. So we had to get all the trucks in, all the engines that we were going to be working on, all that kind of stuff, the teleprompter, the camera crane, the makeup artists, and we had to get in there and shoot it from, I think it was probably 7 p.m. to 5 or 6 a.m. So Just another one of those where you pull out all the stops to get it done.
Doing any sort of production is a team sport.
Mhm.
You as the director and the producer, what's how do you motivate your team? How do you keep everyone on track?
The crew sizes that we usually have are between 3 people and 5 or 6 people, and it's most of the time, at least working locally here in Chicago, it's all folks that I've worked with for years and years, and we're all freelancers. And when you're a freelancer and you have a particular role, like you're a career shooter or you're a career sound person or a teleprompter operator or makeup person, everybody is pretty well internally motivated because if you want to keep working the next day and the next week and the next month, you always arrive on time, you always have a good attitude, you always make sure that you're going the extra mile to keep everybody else on the crew happy with what you're doing. You're always trying to make sure that everything is done just right. So I never really have any problems with motivation. I mean, the folks that I've worked with here locally for 20 years. Um, we all know each other really well, and we all have a common goal of like making the clients happy so that they come back and hire us again because we're not full-time employed at a studio where the work is a given. We're only as good as our last project. Um, and by and large, I've found the same thing with international crews that I've worked with too. I mean, um, people want to get hired again. So you usually don't have to worry too much about motivating folks. I think it might be different, like if you were on really large union crews where there was hundreds of people, that probably might get a little sticky. You've got folks who don't know each other, and there might be a level of anonymity where you could kind of sandbag it a little bit and nobody would notice. But yeah, for by and large, I don't really have any problems with motivation. My biggest thing is just making sure that we stay on schedule for the day, making sure that we are all starting at the right time, making sure that hour by hour and quarter hour by quarter hour, basically, we're getting everything that we need in the can or on tape or on memory cards so that when we get back to the edit suite, when I work with my editors, they have everything they need. They have all the right sound bites that they need. They have all the right B-roll shots that match with the sound bites. They have all of the right sound if there's, particular sounds that are important to the story, that they have all that stuff. And making sure that if we're working with talent, like if we're working with a VIP talent like a CEO or something like that, and they're doing teleprompted speeches, that they've done enough good takes or enough pieces of good takes that when it's all put together, it runs smoothly from top to bottom, and we don't have to do too much general surgery to make things work. I know I sent you way more photos than you actually needed, but it was hard for me to cull them down because it was a good exercise for me too. Because like I don't, you know, I have my favorites folders of images and stuff, but when you start to look back, and especially with when you said it was like my journey with photography, it's like, holy cow, it's been a while now. Like it's been quite a while, going back to like, the mid 90s. So there's a lot to look through and to think about. And it got me realizing that I need to kind of organize some more of my stuff. And then it got me thinking about taking out some old cameras that I haven't used in a while and working in some more mediums that I haven't used in a while. So I think I'll do some of that pretty soon. I will say, like, certainly I have lots of videos of my kids as they've grown up and stuff, but there are certain videos that video clips that we've taken on family vacations or birthdays or holidays or little funny things that have happened. But I still, when I really stop and look at an image, like if I look at a piece of media that's important to me, what I spend more time looking at and examining and just soaking in a still photo more than I do a video clip of family and things like that. So yeah, so it was good for me to look through all this stuff. So I appreciate you asking me to put all these together. It was a good exercise.
At any age, younger, older, whatever, and they want to get into photography either just as a passion or it triggers their passion or as a business. Any wise words of wisdom?
I would say in terms of photography, like I do still think there's a value in learning film photography. And I know that that might be a challenge nowadays. I think a lot of schools aren't necessarily having folks work in dark rooms anymore, but I do think there's a value in that. And I think at the very least, learning to shoot manually and learning the exposure triangle and manual focus and importance of focal lengths. And also, like, if you really are going to go the route of professional photography, I think things like, ambient light level, working with strobes, how you can, work with strobes to light a scene and then dial ambient light in and out. Those are all super important things. I do a lot of work with one commercial photographer here in Chicago, and when we do combo shoots and we're doing the video side of something and he's doing the professional photography side of something, I still learn so much just by watching him and how he works and all of the different things that go into really good photography. I think, everybody's got a cell phone nowadays and it's so easy to just produce content all day long, but I do think that if you take the time to learn how to make really good commercial looking uh, photographs, I think there's a good value in that. And then in terms of getting into the business, for me, early on, it was just not wavering from the path of wanting to get into this business. There's a lot of, if you major in video or photography in college, it can be tough those first few years to land that first full-time gig or to build up enough freelance jobs to where it becomes like a full-time affair for yourself. And I think you just need to stick with it for a couple years. I went to a school with a lot of kids who they graduated and then they kind of tried to get into the business for 6 months or so, and then they just wound up getting into something completely different because it was, easier. And I think that you need to plan to really stick with it for probably 2 to 3 or 4 years right out of school before it really clicks if you want to work in a professional environment. And then I think too, being in a larger market, I think it's tough, even nowadays with, how ubiquitous, content creation is. If you want to do it professionally and you're not creating your own stuff day to day, I think you do need to try to be in a larger market. Someplace like Sydney or Brisbane or New York or Miami or Chicago or LA or Singapore, London. Like you do probably need to be a little bit closer to a large city, at least within an hour, to be able to get in with the population of other um, artisans that have your same interests because it like you said earlier, it is collaborative. And if you're out in the middle of, a small town in Iowa, the fact is you're mostly going to be working with yourself and maybe one other person. You're not going to have like an industry base to really get into and work with. So I think that's another thing is trying to get into a bigger market if you're not already in one. And then uh, client skills, the client soft skills, the 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 toughest thing that I do is it's not the video work, it's not the photography, it's getting and maintaining clients. That's the toughest thing is
Yeah.
finding new clients. And also, I was just talking about this with the commercial photographer that I work with the other day. It's like I'm 48, so I'm almost 50 years old, and you still are having to prove yourself over and over again every week, every month. Because when you do get a new client, there's like this long process where you have to develop that trust with them, and they have to see that what you're doing is good and you can be dependent on and things like that. And it's not like where if you have a job for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years and you have one boss who knows that you're really good at your job, and you don't have that issue to deal with. You're just constantly having to prove yourself over and over again. So you have to kind of be ready to do that. um, Start saving money for retirement. That's a big one. Even if it's $5 a week, you got to start putting money away. When I was a young person, I didn't know anything about compounding interest or investments or anything like that. And when I did go freelance and started my own business in 2005, um, it kind of lit a fire under me to start thinking about what my future would look like and what my future would look like, once I stopped working, because I didn't work for a big Fortune 500 company where they're contributing to a 401k for me year in and year out. So I would say learn about investing. You can make it fun. It doesn't have to be taxing. It doesn't have to be something um, stuffy or boring. And like I said, sock a little money away every week, every month. It doesn't have to be a big amount, but you need to get on that early.
You've got a number of
Yeah, sure.
awards there behind your shoulder there.
Telly Awards back here, and then some Emmy Awards. And it's always nice to get the recognition for a job well done on various projects. So we take those wins when we can get them. But I mean, like I said earlier, every project that we do is, you're only as good as your last project. So everyone that we have, we're always trying to put our best foot forward and keep the client happy and make something that's entertaining for people to watch.
Mike, I really appreciate your time. Thanks again
Likewise.
for spending the time to do this interview, and hopefully my viewers and subscribers will find this video interesting and will get a
Yeah,
lot of value out of your experience and your
I
journey.
hope so. I hope so. Well, thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for a great job. Thanks for a great job on the ground, all up and down the east coast of Australia. It was quite an adventure, and you made it happen for us. It worked out perfectly.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to working with you again in the future,
Yeah,
somewhere in the world.
definitely, most definitely.
Thanks everyone for watching the video. If you found value in this video, then give it a thumbs up. That's how you support the channel. If you're in the States, reach out to Mike if you've got a project where you need a super duper producer, director, filmmaker. Mike's the man, of course. If it's the first time to my channel, you haven't already subscribed, then press subscribe, press notifications. You'll be notified when the next video is out. And we'll catch up again soon, Mike.
Thank
Great.
you.
See ya.